A young widow named Cassandra Reynolds owed $22,000. Not because she spent it. Not because she borrowed it carelessly. But because her husband, Michael, had borrowed it before he died, and the men who loaned him that money did not care that he was buried 6 months ago. They cared about their money. They cared about the interest that grew like a tumor, eating through the days. Creditors called at dawn, called at midnight, called when she was serving soup to strangers at 3 in the morning. 5 days remained before they took everything. Her apartment, her car, the small stuffed rabbit that belonged to her 6-year-old son, Micah. She had $78 in her pocket. 78. That number lived in her mind like a curse. $78 between survival and complete erasure. The summer rain hammered against the windows of Lou's Diner on Market Street in San Francisco. 3:22 in the morning. A time when most of the city slept, but Cassandra Reynolds worked. The checkered black and white floor gleamed under fluorescent lights, reflecting the neon pink and blue glow from the jukebox in the corner. The smell of stale coffee, grease, and wet pavement hung heavy in the air. Outside, the summer thunderstorm tore through the streets like something with teeth. She did not notice him at first. The man sat alone in booth 7, the corner booth that nobody wanted because the vinyl was cracked and the window looked out onto the alley where rats moved like shadows. He wore an expensive black suit jacket draped over the seat beside him, a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the smooth, hard chest of someone who had never worked a day shift in his life. His dark hair was swept back from his face. A thin scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, silver in the fluorescent light. His hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had been empty for 40 minutes. His name was Nico Calabrese. For 23 years, Nico Calabrese had controlled every moment, every breath, every tremor in his body with the precision of a perfectly programmed machine. When his father bled out on a warehouse floor in 1998, stabbed 17 times by men from a rival family, young Nico had stood over the body and felt something cold and dangerous stir in his chest. He had sworn an oath on that blood that day. He would build an empire so vast, so powerful, that no one would ever dare touch what belonged to him again. And he had. At 47 years old, Nico Calabrese owned half of San Francisco. His men moved through the city like ghosts. His word was law. His touch was death. But tonight, his hands would not stop shaking. 6 hours earlier, his 7-year-old daughter, Valentina, had left school early with a headache. His sister had picked her up, distracted by a phone call. The rain had started suddenly, without warning. They were crossing Market Street near Lou's Diner when the delivery truck ran the red light. The driver never saw the child. But someone did. A woman in a white waitress uniform, working a shift that would not end until sunrise, heard the squeal of tires and the scream of brakes. She did not hesitate. She ran into the street, pulled the small girl backward, the truck passing so close that the wind of it knocked them both to the ground. The woman stayed with Valentina until the ambulance arrived. She held her hand. She whispered that everything would be okay, that she was safe, that the scared little girl was not alone. When Nico's sister finally found them, the woman was gone. Just a face in a uniform, a stranger who risked her life for a child whose name she would never know. For the first time in 23 years, Nico Calabrese could not control his hands. The glass door of Lou's Diner swung open. Rain poured in. Wind scattered napkins across the checkered floor like white leaves. A woman stumbled through the opening, and the diner went silent. The cook stopped moving. The manager froze. Even the jukebox seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Cassandra Reynolds stood in the doorway, soaking wet, her white uniform plastered against her skin. Blood streamed from a gash above her left eye, which was swollen completely shut, purple and black and yellow all at once. Handprints bruised her throat, dark as a death sentence, 5 fingers on each side where someone's hands had closed around her neck and squeezed. Her shoulder was torn, the fabric hanging in shreds. She took 3 steps into the diner, her wet shoes squeaking on the checkered floor. 1 step. 2. 3. Her knees buckled. She fell forward, catching herself on the edge of booth 7. Her blood dripped onto the Formica table, a small red circle that spread like a terrible flower. She looked up, and her right eye, the one that could still see, met the eyes of the man in the corner booth. Nico Calabrese's coffee cup shattered in his grip. The ceramic fell to the floor in pieces. Cold coffee splattered across his white shirt. He did not feel it. He did not move. He simply stared at the woman in front of him, her face battered, her throat marked with bruises that matched the size of hands, her eye swollen shut, and he understood in that single moment that this was the woman who had saved his daughter's life. "Water," Cassandra whispered. Her voice was barely audible, like a candle flame in the wind. "Just water." "Get me everything," Nico said. His voice, when it came, was deep and solid like an oath, like venom, like the last sound a condemned man hears before the end. The manager moved without question. The cook appeared with clean towels. Someone brought ice wrapped in cloth. But Nico did not touch any of it. He simply watched this woman, this stranger who had pulled his daughter from death, and he understood that the universe had just placed something precious in his hand. Something that could not be ignored. Something that could not be repaid with money. The rain continued to hammer the windows. The summer storm showed no mercy. But what she did not know was that 6 hours earlier, her small act of courage had planted a seed in the mind of a man who had spent 23 years building walls so high that nothing could reach him. A man whose hands were shaking for the first time in more than 2 decades. A man who had just learned that there were still people in this world willing to die for strangers. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 72 hours before this moment, when Cassandra Reynolds still believed she could survive this alone. 3 days earlier. Early morning, 5:45 a.m. A small apartment in the Richmond district, where the rent consumed everything, where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing next door, where Cassandra counted her money on the kitchen table like a desperate accountant tallying the cost of her own survival. The envelope sat in front of her. Official. Stamped. Words printed in bold black letters, foreclosure notice. $22,000. Due in 5 days. Her hands trembled as she touched it, not because of the money, but because of what the money meant. It meant Micah's school would change. It meant the apartment would be gone. It meant the neighbors who brought him soup when she worked nights would no longer need to, because there would be nothing left to protect. She opened her wallet. $20. A 10. A 5. 2 ones. Coins in a small glass jar, counted and recounted so many times that she knew the exact total without looking. $78. That was all. That was everything. Micah stood in the doorway, still in his pajamas, his dark hair uncombed, holding the drawing he had made yesterday in school. A picture of 4 people. A woman. A man. A boy. A girl. But there was no girl in their family. Cassandra stared at the drawing and understood that her son was drawing the family he wanted, not the family he had. "Mommy, is Daddy coming home today?" Micah asked. He was 6 years old. He had learned to ask this question every morning, as if repetition might change the answer. "No, baby," Cassandra said. She folded the drawing and placed it in her pocket, close to her heart. Daddy is still in heaven. She dressed for work in the darkness. Her white uniform, stained from yesterday's shift, still damp from the dryer. Her name tag, scratched and faded, Cassandra. She pinned it to her chest and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. She had Michael's eyes, or she used to. Now they were hollow, exhausted, the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting mercy from the world. Her hair, once long and dark, was pulled back in a tight bun. Not because it was fashionable, but because it was practical. Every moment mattered when you were fighting for survival. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, arrived at 6:15 a.m. to watch Micah. She came with coffee and a sad smile. She did not charge for watching him anymore. She had stopped charging 3 months ago when she realized that Cassandra had nothing left to give. "How long tonight?" Mrs. Chen asked. 14 hours, Cassandra said. "I'll be back by 8. Mrs. Chen's smile faded. She knew what 14 hours meant. It meant a double shift. It meant serving food to strangers while her own son ate cereal from a chip bowl. It meant counting tips that barely added up to minimum wage. It meant coming home with nothing. Lou's diner sat on Market Street like a monument to forgotten dreams. The neon sign flickered. The windows were fogged with humidity and the grease of 1,000 meals. Inside, the checkered floor was cracked in places. The booths were held together with duct tape and hope. The coffee was burned. The pie was from a wholesale distributor. But people came because it was open 24 hours, because the music on the jukebox was from another era, because sometimes the broken places attract broken people. Cassandra tied on her apron at 6:30 a.m. Her shift began. The first customer arrived at 6:45, a construction worker ordering eggs and bacon and toast and black coffee. She wrote down his order in her small notepad, the one she had bought 2 years ago for 79 cents, and it still had half the pages left. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away. By noon, she had served 43 customers. She had poured 117 cups of coffee. She had wiped down 16 tables. She had taken an order from a man who stiffed her on the tip, a businessman in an expensive suit who left $2 on a $45 check. $2. She had smiled anyway. She had thanked him. She had meant none of it. The afternoon passed in a blur of faces and voices and the smell of frying food. Her feet ached. Her back ached. Her hands, calloused from years of washing dishes and wiping tables, were raw from hot water. She did not eat. She never ate during her shifts. The food was for customers. The leftovers were for her, the burned toast, the cold French fries, the soup that had been sitting in the warming pot too long. She would eat those things tonight after her shift, standing in the dark kitchen, eating the scraps of other people's meals. At 6 p.m., Marco appeared. He was the first to arrive, sitting in booth 3, ordering coffee and a sandwich. But Marco did not order because he was hungry. Marco ordered because he was watching. His suit was black and expensive. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He had the look of someone who spent his days making phone calls and ensuring that debts were collected, promises were kept, and disobedience was punished. Cassandra brought his coffee. Her hands were steady. She had learned to keep her hands steady, even when her insides were falling apart. "How are you tonight, Cassandra?" Marco asked. He smiled, but it was not a kind smile. "Tired," she said. "The truth. Always better than a lie." "Your husband owed money to people I work for," Marco said. He sipped his coffee. "Very important people. People who do not forget debts." Cassandra said nothing. She knew what was coming. 5 days, Marco continued. "They are willing to extend the deadline. Once more. But this is the final extension. On Friday, the foreclosure happens. On Saturday, we come for what is owed." "I am working on it," Cassandra said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Work harder," Marco said. He left after eating only half his sandwich. He left $20 on a $14 check, which seemed generous until Cassandra realized it was a message. He wanted her to know that he had money. That he had power. That the gap between his world and her world was so vast that he could afford to waste $14 on the ground. The evening rush came at 7 p.m. Families eating before they went home. Couples on dates. Elderly people who came to the diner because they were lonely and the diner was warm. Cassandra moved between the tables like a ghost, quiet, faithful, invisible. She refilled water glasses. She brought bread baskets. She asked if everything tasted okay. She smiled at children. She did not think about Micah. She could not afford to think about Micah. If she thought about him, she would cry, and if she cried, she would be useless. At 10 p.m., a girl came through the door. She was about 7 years old, holding her mother's hand. They sat in booth 5. The mother ordered a burger. The girl ordered mac and cheese. Cassandra brought their food and watched the girl eat, watched the way she swung her legs under the table, watched the way she looked at her mother with absolute trust. The girl had Nico Calabrese's dark hair. The same color, the same texture. But Cassandra did not know that. She did not know that this child's father was a man who built empires on blood and fear. She did not know that in 6 hours, this girl would walk out of school early with a headache and climb into a car, and that in another 6 hours, she would stand at the edge of death. All Cassandra knew was that this child was beautiful, and that she would never have the things that this child had. She returned to the kitchen. She did not eat. She did not rest. She counted the hours. 14 hours remained in her shift. 13. 12. 11. The summer rain began at midnight. It came suddenly, without warning, falling so hard that it sounded like gunfire on the roof of the diner. The summer rain fell in sheets at midnight, turning the streets of San Francisco into rivers of neon and shadow. Cassandra Reynolds stood outside Lou's diner at 1 in the morning, her uniform soaked through, her breathing coming in short gasps. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut above her left eye. Her throat bore the purple marks of hands, 5 fingers on each side, pressed deep into her skin like a signature. She was shaking. Not from cold. From something deeper. Something that felt like the world had tilted and she could not find solid ground. She had been walking to her car when Robert Hargrove stepped out from between 2 parked vehicles. She recognized him immediately from the parking lot 3 days ago, when he had cornered her after her shift, his voice low and threatening, asking her to spy on his uncle's operations. She had refused. She had told him no. And now, as she stumbled through the rain toward the diner's back door, she understood that refusal had a cost she could not afford. But at that exact moment, inside Lou's diner, in the corner booth where the neon light pooled blue and cold, Nico Calabrese sat alone. He was a tall man, 6'2", with shoulders that filled the space like he was built to take up room in the world. His suit was black, tailored to perfection, the fabric worth more than Cassandra's monthly rent. His white shirt was open at the collar, revealing a chest marked with a thin scar that ran from his collarbone to his ribs, a scar from a knife fight when he was 17, a fight he won. His dark hair was brushed back from his face. His eyes were the color of a winter sky. And he was holding a photograph of his 7-year-old niece, the one with dark curls and a yellow dress, the one who had nearly been hit by traffic outside this very diner just 6 hours ago. A man had called him at 7:45 p.m. Marco. His most trusted lieutenant for 23 years. Marco's voice had been shaking in a way Nico had never heard before. The girl, Marco had said. She went to school. The nanny picked her up at 3 p.m. At 3:32, she collapsed in the car. Headache, fever, they said seizure. We got her to the hospital. She's stable now. But sir, there's something else. Something you need to know. And Marco had told him about the woman. The waitress. The one who had pulled his niece from traffic at 3:15 p.m., exactly 17 minutes before the collapse began. Nico had not moved. He had not spoken. He had simply ended the call and driven to the diner. He had ordered black coffee. He had sat in the corner booth and thought about fate the way men in his position think about fate, as something that could be controlled, managed, predicted. But this was something else. This was a stranger saving his family. This was a woman stepping into traffic for a child who belonged to him. He did not believe in debt. He believed in power. But something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest as he looked at the photograph. The rain hammered on the diner's roof like 1,000 fists demanding entry. The neon sign in the window buzzed and flickered. The waitress on duty, a young man named Tommy, was wiping down the counter. No other customers. Just the rain and the coffee and the clock on the wall showing 1:17 in the morning. And then the back door opened. Cassandra stood in the doorway, water streaming down her face, mixing with blood. Her black waitress uniform clung to her skin. Her left eye was swelling, the skin already turning purple and blue. Her hands trembled as she reached up to touch her throat, and even in the harsh diner light, the handprints were visible. 5 fingers on the left side. 5 on the right. Tommy looked up from the counter and the color drained from his face. Cassandra, oh God, what happened? Should I call 911? She did not answer. She moved forward like someone walking through a dream, like someone whose body had been disconnected from her mind. Her eyes found the corner booth. They found Nico Calabrese. And for a moment, time seemed to stop. Nico saw her. He saw the bruises. He saw the blood. He saw the way she was shaking like a leaf caught in a hurricane. And he stood up. This was the first time in 23 years that Marco would later tell the story of the moment that changed everything, the moment when Nico Calabrese stood up for a woman he had never met. His men would speak of it in whispers for years. In 15 years, Marco would say, I had never seen him move like that. Not fast. Not angry. Just certain. He crossed the diner in 5 strides. His cashmere coat, the one that cost more than Cassandra's annual salary, brushed against the tables as he passed. His movements were deliberate, each step controlled. When he reached her, he did not touch her face. He did not try to comfort her. He simply stood beside her and said, in a voice like thunder, like the deepest part of the ocean, my name is Nico Calabrese. You saved my niece this afternoon. And I need you to tell me who did this to you. Cassandra's legs gave out. Not from fear. From the weight of everything. 8 months of grief. 314 days of counting pennies. The foreclosure notice on her kitchen table. Mrs. Chen's cold eyes. The $78 in her wallet that had to last until Friday. And now this. Now a man in a suit that cost more than everything she owned was standing beside her, and his voice was like a promise. She collapsed into the booth. Not gracefully. Her body simply failed. She sat down hard on the vinyl seat, and her breath came out in a sound like breaking glass. Tommy moved to help her, but Nico raised one hand and Tommy froze. Water, Nico said. Not a question. A command. Tommy brought water. Nico set it in front of her. He sat down across from her, and for the first time in his life, a man of his position, a man who had built an empire on violence and vengeance, a man who had watched his own father murdered when he was 16 years old and had spent every year since ensuring that no one he loved would ever be helpless again, sat across from a stranger and said, "Tell me what happened." Cassandra's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible above the rain. She told him about Robert Hargrove. About the parking lot 3 nights ago. About the demand to spy on his uncle's operations. About her refusal. About the way he had cornered her outside at 1 a.m., how his hands had closed around her throat, how she had fought and fought but he was stronger, so much stronger, and she thought he was going to kill her, and in that moment she thought about Micah, about her 6-year-old son who would be orphaned, who would be alone, and she had screamed, and then Robert had released her and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her bleeding in the rain. Nico listened. His face did not move. His eyes did not change. But something deep in his chest, something that had been frozen for 23 years, ever since he decided that emotions were a liability in his world, began to thaw. "What is your name?" he asked. "Cassandra Reynolds." "Do you have family, Cassandra?" She nodded. "My son. Micah. He is 6. His father died 8 months ago. He left debts. $22,000 in debts. I have 5 days to pay them or I lose our apartment. I have $78 in my wallet. I work here and at another diner and I still cannot earn enough. And my neighbors, they are tired of watching him. They are kind but they are tired." She had not meant to tell him all of this. But in the presence of a man like Nico Calabrese, in the presence of someone who did not flinch when confronted with the truth of her desperation, the words simply came out. Nico did not move. He did not express sympathy or anger or any emotion at all. He simply sat there, his winter sky eyes fixed on her face, and then he did something unprecedented. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He made a call. One call. He spoke in Italian, rapid and clipped, and the conversation lasted 45 seconds. Then he ended the call and put the phone away. "Your creditors will be contacted by morning," he said. "They will inform you that your husband's debt has been paid in full. All of it. $22,000. You will also receive a payment of $15,000 to cover expenses and emergency needs. By tomorrow afternoon, you will have a job offer from one of my legitimate businesses, an office manager position, $60,000 a year, benefits included, flexible hours so you can be with your son when he comes home from school. You will no longer work double shifts. You will no longer choose between eating and paying rent. Do you understand?" Cassandra stared at him. For a moment, she could not speak. She could not breathe. She could not process what he was saying because it sounded like a dream, like something that happened to other people, not to her. "Why?" she whispered. "You do not know me. I am nobody. I am just—" "You are not nobody," Nico said, and his voice was like a blade wrapped in ice. "You are the woman who pulled my niece from traffic when you had no reason to do so. You were a stranger. You owed us nothing. But you acted. And in my world, Cassandra, in the world I have built, there is a code. Those who protect my family are protected by me. Those who harm what is mine are erased. Robert Hargrove will understand both of these things before the sun rises." The rain continued to fall. The neon sign buzzed. Tommy stood behind the counter, pretending to work, but his hands were shaking. And Cassandra Reynolds sat across from a man who had just changed her entire life, and she understood that she had crossed into a world she did not know existed, a world of loyalty and consequence, a world where kindness was not free but was instead a currency more valuable than money. The rain fell like a blade wrapped in ice, turning the summer night into something else entirely. Cassandra Reynolds stood in the parking lot behind Gino's diner, her uniform torn, her left eye swollen shut, blood mixing with rainwater and running down her throat where Robert Hargrove's fingers had left 5 perfect purple bruises. She could not catch her breath. Her ribs screamed with each inhale. The storm above her mirrored something broken inside, something that had finally shattered after 8 months of holding together by sheer will alone. She had exactly $78 in her apron pocket. $78 and a child's drawing of a family standing in front of a house with a yellow door. Micah had drawn it 3 weeks ago, before everything collapsed, before the creditors started calling at 3 in the morning, before she understood that love was not enough to keep a roof over your head. Robert Hargrove's words echoed in her mind as lightning cracked the sky open, "You'll do what I say or I'll make sure your kid grows up visiting you in prison." She forced herself to walk back inside the diner. The bell above the door chimed, a sound so normal it felt cruel. The interior was exactly as it always was at 3 in the morning, fluorescent lights humming their tired song, the smell of stale coffee hanging in air thick enough to choke on, the checkered floor stretching into shadow. Tommy, the overnight cook, was nowhere to be seen. Gus was in the back office, doing paperwork that would never add up to anything good. But the corner booth, booth 7, was not empty. Nico Calabrese sat alone, facing the door as he always did, his expensive black suit somehow immaculate despite the humid night, his dark hair graying at the temples, a thin scar running through his left eyebrow like a map of some ancient wound. His hands were spread flat on the table, and they were shaking. She had served him coffee 3 times over the past 6 months. He never spoke. He never demanded anything. He simply sat and watched the door and occasionally looked at his phone with an expression that suggested he was carrying the weight of something too heavy for one man to bear. She had assumed he was dangerous. She had been correct. His eye snapped to hers the moment her wet shoe squeaked on the floor. For half a second, His face was completely unguarded, raw, lost, broken open like something that had been sealed shut for decades and finally cracked. Then he saw the blood. Nico stood so quickly the table scraped across the floor with a sound like bones breaking. "Who did this to you?" His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Quiet voices carried more threat than screaming ever could. "I'm fine," Cassandra tried, but her knees were already buckling. The adrenaline was leaving her body, and pain was rushing in to fill the space it left behind. The world tilted. Nico caught her before she fell. His hands on her shoulders were steady, sure, controlled. He carried her to booth 7 and set her down on the vinyl seat with the kind of gentleness she had not experienced since her mother died. He moved to the counter, returned with ice wrapped in clean bar towels and a glass of water, and pressed the cold compress to her swollen eye. "Hold this," he said. She did, because refusing seemed impossible. He examined the handprint bruises on her throat, counting each one with his eyes. His jaw tightened with each purple mark. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, the kindness was still there, but underneath it was something ancient and dangerous. "Tell me who." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "Why do you care?" "I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress. I clean tables and pour coffee and." 6 hours ago, Nico said, leaning forward, his eyes burning with intensity that made her chest tighten, "You pulled my niece from traffic." She was crossing the street, distracted, and a delivery truck was coming. "You saw her. You did not think about it. You did not calculate whether it was worth the risk. You simply moved." Cassandra's good eye widened. "That was my family," he said, and the word cracked something in his voice. "The only family I have left. My sister died when Emma was 3. My brother-in-law 8 years later. Emma is all I have." When Marco called to tell me what happened, when he said she nearly died and a stranger pulled her back, he stopped, clenched his jaw. "I came here tonight to find you. To thank you. To offer you anything you needed." He gestured at the empty diner, at the rain hammering the windows, at the neon signs flickering like dying hearts. "Instead, I have been sitting in this booth for 40 minutes trying to remember how to breathe." The confession hung between them, enormous and fragile. "His name is Robert Hargrove," Cassandra whispered. "He said he was your nephew. He said you come here for private meetings, and if I listened to your conversations, if I told him what you said, my debt would disappear." The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched across the booth like something solid, something that could crush bone. "What debt?" Nico asked quietly. $22,000, she said, the number feeling like a confession of failure. "My husband died 8 months ago. He had been gambling. Borrowing from people. When the creditors came up, her voice broke. I have $78. I have 5 days. I work 16-hour shifts and it is not enough. It will never be enough." Nico listened without interrupting. When she finished, he closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked directly at her, and she understood that she had just revealed something to a man who could either save her or destroy her, and there was no middle ground. "Robert Hargrove is my brother-in-law's son," Nico said. "He is entitled and stupid. He thinks because we share family blood, he deserves power in my organization. I have refused him for 5 years." His hands curled into fists on the table. "This is how he responds. By threatening you." "I'm not under your protection," Cassandra whispered. "Yes," Nico said, "you are. You saved my family. In my world, that creates a debt that cannot be measured in money. You protected what is mine. Now I protect yours. That is code." He pulled out his phone and typed a single message. Within 5 minutes, Marco and Pietro arrived, soaked from the rain, their eyes going wide when they saw their boss sitting across from a bleeding woman, his expression gentle in a way that contradicted everything they knew about Nico Calabrese. "Take her to Dr. Reyes," Nico ordered. "Private clinic, full examination. Then her home." Post 2 men outside her building tonight. No one approaches her or her son. I can't accept, Cassandra began. You can and you will, Nico interrupted, his tone firm but not harsh. Your debt will be gone by dawn. All of it. The creditors will be paid in full with instructions that you are not to be contacted again. Your son will be safe. You will be safe. As Marco helped Cassandra to her feet, Nico's phone rang. The screen lit with a name, Catherine Mercer. He stepped away from the booth, his voice dropping low as the rain continued its violent assault against the windows. Yes, Catherine. I heard about Robert. A pause. Then, I can ensure it becomes very public. Sometimes a spoiled child needs to see his tantrum reflected back to him by the entire world. Nico said nothing for a long moment. The sound of the rain intensified, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I will let you know, he finally said, and ended the call. But what Cassandra did not understand, as she collapsed into the passenger seat of Marco's car with ice against her eye and the rain dissolving around her, was that Robert Hargrove had just set in motion a series of events that would end not with mercy, but with systematic destruction. His mistake was assuming Nico would handle it quietly. His greater mistake was not understanding that some lines, once crossed, erased the person who crossed them entirely. Friday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Cassandra Reynolds woke to sunlight filtering through thin cotton curtains, and for the first time in 7 years, her body did not move immediately. No alarm. No startle. No voice in her chest screaming that she was late, that she was failing, that the world was collapsing. She lay still, breathing, counting the breaths like a prayer. 12 hours of sleep. Actual sleep. Not the fractured, terror-broken kind that had become her normal but real, deep, restorative sleep that left her feeling almost human again. She sat up slowly. Her ribs sang with bruises. Her throat carried the landscape of Robert Hargrove's fingers in purple and black. Her left eye had swollen to a slit. The doctor had said no broken bones but 3 fractured ribs, a minor concussion, and contusions that would darken before they lightened. Dr. Reyes had been kind. Quiet. She had not asked questions about how a woman who worked the night shift at a diner had come to be covered in handprints. She had simply treated the injuries and written 2 prescriptions, ibuprofen and rest. Cassandra checked her phone. 17 missed calls from numbers she recognized immediately. Creditors. The foreclosure company. The hospital where Micah had been born, still calling about an outstanding balance from his birth 6 years ago. She almost deleted them without listening, the way she always did, but something stopped her. She opened her email instead. One message. Sent at 6:27 a.m. from an address that was just numbers and letters, no name attached. Debt settled. All accounts cleared. You are free. NC. Her hands began to shake. She read the email 3 times, then a 4th, certain she was misunderstanding the words. But they did not change. She opened her banking app, the one she had not checked in days because she could not bear to see the negative balance, the overdraft fees, the spiral of numbers that represented her son's future eroding like sand. The balance read 47 cents. No. Wrong app. She opened the other one, the credit monitoring service she used to track the slow death of her financial existence. And there, in black and white, was a list of every debt she carried, every creditor she owed, with a single word next to each one, settled. $22,000. Gone. Paid in full. Cleared. Cassandra lowered herself back onto the edge of her bed, and something inside her broke open like a seed that had been waiting years for rain. The sobs came from somewhere below her ribs, from the place where she had buried hope so deep she thought it had died. But it had not died. It had been sleeping. And now it woke up screaming, and she let it, her body shaking with the force of a relief so profound it felt like grief. The apartment was so quiet she could hear the neighbor's television through the wall, a cooking show, someone describing the temperature of oil. Normal sounds. Normal life continuing while hers tilted on its axis. By late afternoon, Micah would come home from the neighbor's house where he stayed during her shifts. She would hold him and not tell him that their lives had just been remade. She would cook dinner from actual food, not the discounted older items from the diner's trash. She would sleep beside him and know that when morning came, the foreclosure notice would still be there, but it would not matter anymore because the debt was gone, and gone meant they could stay. But at the diner, things were about to get much worse before they got better. Friday, 11:30 at night. Cassandra walked through the kitchen door against Dr. Reyes's explicit instructions. The doctor had said rest, had said no work for at least a week, had said the concussion needed monitoring and the ribs needed immobility. Cassandra had nodded and agreed and then called Gus, the diner's owner, because sitting at home meant losing 8 hours of pay and she could not afford to lose 8 hours of anything, even now, even with the debt settled, because now there were new fears. New possibilities. New things to protect. Gus took one look at her face and told her to go home. No negotiation, no discussion. You are still on payroll, he said. Take the week. You look like you got hit by a bus. She looked like Robert Hargrove had tried to kill her. But she did not say that. Instead, she refused. They compromised. Counter work only. No heavy lifting. No reaching for things on high shelves. She would stand and take orders and pour coffee and that would be all. The diner was nearly empty at 1:40 in the morning. A trucker in booth 3, a young couple holding hands in booth 1, and then the door chimed and Robert Hargrove walked in like he owned the place. He saw her immediately. His eyes tracked across her bruised face, the swelling that no amount of makeup could hide, the way she moved with careful deliberation to protect her ribs. And he smiled. A smile like a blade wrapped in ice. He chose booth 7. The corner booth. The one where he could watch her work and be watched by no one else. A deliberate power play. A statement. Cassandra's hand shook as she picked up the coffee pot. She had known, intellectually, that she might see him again. The city was not that large. But knowing and experiencing were different countries, and she was not ready for this border crossing. She approached booth 7. Coffee. Her voice was barely a whisper. Decided to cooperate yet? Robert's voice carried across the diner like a weapon. The couple in booth 1 glanced over. The trucker pretended not to notice. Got any good information for me? My uncle been in tonight? Any conversations I should know about? Cassandra set the pot down carefully, using the gesture to step back, to create distance. I'm not helping you. Robert's smile vanished like smoke. He stood, and even sitting he had been predatory, but standing he was something else entirely. Something that had decided to stop pretending. He stepped close. Invaded her space. His breath smelled like whiskey and cigarettes and something rotten underneath, like decay masquerading as cologne. You stupid bitch. I gave you a chance. Now I'm gonna make sure that. The door chimed. Nico Calabrese walked in, flanked by Marco and Pietro, and the temperature of the entire room changed. It was not just the physical presence of 3 large men in expensive suits, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The way the light seemed to darken around them not because they blocked anything but because their presence absorbed brightness the way a black hole absorbs light. Robert went pale. He actually stepped backward, his hand hitting the table. Nico walked slowly through the diner, his movements deliberate, each step a separate decision. He wore a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than everything Cassandra owned, and his dark eyes were fixed on his nephew with a combination of disappointment and something that looked almost like pity. Marco and Pietro positioned themselves by the door. No blocking the exit. Just being present. Just making sure Robert understood that if he moved, they would know. Nico slid into booth 7. Robert remained standing, his hands clenching and unclenching. Robert. I've been looking for you, Nico said quietly. His voice was like thunder that had learned patience. Uncle Nico, I was just. You were just threatening the woman who saved my niece's life, Nico interrupted. His tone remained calm, almost pleasant, which somehow made the words more devastating. You put your hands on her. You marked her throat with your fingers. You tried to use her to spy on me. And you did all of this believing I would never know. Robert's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. You have embarrassed me for the last time, Nico continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. This family's name means something. It means that those who harm ours will answer. And you, Robert, have harmed someone under my protection. Nico pulled out his phone. He made a call. Catherine, it's time. Yes. All of it. Make it public. He ended the call and looked at Robert with an expression of such profound finality that Robert seemed to age years in seconds. Nico stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked past his nephew without another word. Marco and Pietro followed. The door chimed as they left. Robert collapsed into the booth. Within 2 hours, the machinery of destruction began to turn. Catherine Mercer's media contacts worked with surgical precision. Security footage from the diner parking lot appeared on 3 local news websites by 3:15 a.m. By 4 o'clock, a live television expose aired on an early morning news program, evidence of Robert's extortion attempt against small business owners, his threats made with his uncle's name, his cocaine habit funded by stealing from family accounts. The footage was undeniable. Robert's face clear, his hand around Cassandra's throat, her body limp against the car, his mouth moving with threats that the audio captured with perfect clarity. Cassandra watched it from her apartment at 5:41 a.m., unable to look away, unable to believe that her pain was being broadcast to strangers. But something else was happening too. Every comment beneath the video was rage directed at Robert, not at her. Every share was an act of protection, not an invasion. By 7:08 a.m., he was trending on social media. #Hargrove exposed. His own friends distancing themselves. His mother calling, screaming that he had humiliated the family. Former associates blocking his number. And in his luxury condo, Robert Hargrove sat alone, watching his life disintegrate on screens, understanding for the first time that some lines, once crossed, erased the person who crossed them entirely. The rain continued outside, cleansing the city street by street, washing away the night, preparing the world for what comes after storms. Monday morning arrived, and Robert Hargrove was arrested. The charges were assault, extortion, and theft from family accounts. The evidence was absolute. The public sentiment was total. He would face federal charges, eventually, serving a mandatory minimum of 40 years, his life not ended but erased, transformed into years counted in a cell, days marked by concrete walls, nights listening to the breathing of other broken men. But that was only half the justice. Catherine Mercer, the woman who had orchestrated his exposure, the socialite who had used her connections to demolish him, received her own reckoning from sources far more powerful than the law. Nico had connections in places that operated with their own rules. Her investments began to fail. Her charities lost funding. Her social standing crumbled as systematically as Robert's, though in the elegant world where she had ruled, the destruction was perhaps even more complete. She watched the same forces that had destroyed her nephew turn toward her, and unlike Robert, she understood immediately who had orchestrated it. She tried to apologize. Nico did not accept apologies. He accepted accountability, and accountability for Catherine meant loss measured in millions and standing measured in zeros. Cassandra knew none of these details. What she knew was that Robert Hargrove had disappeared from the news cycle by Wednesday. That her apartment was no longer under threat of foreclosure. That Micah could stay in his school. That she could breathe. And somewhere in the city, Nico Calabrese sat in a restaurant booth at midnight, his men gathering around him in the way they always did, and Marco leaned over and said quietly, "We have never seen you like this before." And Nico did not respond, because there was nothing to say. In 15 years, his men had never seen him move for anyone who was not blood. But Cassandra Reynolds had saved his niece's life, had risked everything for a child who did not belong to her, and in the code that Nico had built his entire world around, that meant she was already family. She just did not know it yet. Monday morning arrived with paperwork and silence. Cassandra sat at her kitchen table, the documents spread before her like evidence of a life that had finally shifted. The foreclosure notice was gone. The creditors' letters had stopped. In their place lay official releases, signatures from every company that had circled her for months like sharks sensing blood in water. All of it paid. All of it erased. $22,000 in debt that should have taken her 15 years to repay, gone in a single night. She read the same paragraph 3 times without understanding it. Micah appeared in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted by the hallway light. 6 years old, still half asleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit she had bought him from a thrift store for $2. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Cassandra looked down. Her hands were shaking. Tears ran down her face in thin, steady lines. She could not remember the last time she had cried like this, without fear, without desperation. These were different tears. These were the kind that came when the weight you had been carrying alone finally became light enough to set down. "Come here, baby," she whispered. Micah crossed the kitchen in that careful way children move when they sense something important is happening. She pulled him into her lap, wrapped her arms around him, breathed in the smell of his shampoo and sleep-warm skin. He was still so small. Still dependent on her for everything. And for months, that weight had been crushing her into the ground. "These are happy tears," she said into his hair. "We're going to be okay now. We're going to be okay." Micah patted her face with one small hand, the gesture so achingly tender that something inside her chest broke open like ice in spring. She held him tighter, and in that moment, the diner shifts and the blood on her hands and the sound of her own screaming felt impossibly distant. Like something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. Tuesday arrived at 6 o'clock in the evening, and the waterfront park smelled like salt and kelp and the particular dampness of San Francisco before sunset. Cassandra saw them first, Marco and Pietro standing beneath a cypress tree at the edge of the grass, their dark suits too formal for the playground, their posture too alert. And then she saw Nico, sitting on a weathered bench facing the water, watching his niece on the swings with the expression of a man who had learned to measure his life in small, stolen moments of peace. The little girl noticed Cassandra before anyone else did. She was maybe 5, all dark curls and energy, and recognition lit her face like a match striking. She abandoned the swings mid-arc and ran directly toward Cassandra, her legs pumping furiously, her laughter high and uncomplicated. "You're the lady who saved me," the child shouted, crashing into Cassandra's legs and hugging them with surprising force. Cassandra knelt down, brought herself level with the girl's eyes. The bruises on her own face were fading now, yellow and purple at the edges, but still visible. Still real. Still proof. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" she asked. "Good. Uncle Nico says you're a hero." The girl tilted her head, studying Cassandra's damaged face with the unself-conscious intensity of childhood. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore," Cassandra said, and meant it. The girl accepted this as sufficient truth and ran back to the swings, calling for Marco to push her higher. Cassandra straightened and walked to the bench where Nico sat. He did not turn to look at her, but she felt the moment she sat beside him, felt the shift in the air between them like pressure before a storm breaks. They sat in silence as the sun moved lower. The water turned gold, then orange, then the particular shade of red that only happens in that hour when day is surrendering to night. Cassandra counted her own heartbeats. 17, 18, 19. She had learned to count like this during her shifts at the diner, a way to make time pass, a way to measure the distance between one moment and the next. "Robert took a plea deal," Nico said finally. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, the way someone might comment on the weather. 3 years county. Assault charges. Restraining order. No contact with anyone in my family. Cassandra nodded. She had expected this. Catherine Mercer made sure every news outlet in the state ran the story, he continued. His name is tied to what he did now. Every employer who searches him will find it. Every person he meets will find it. His punishment is not prison. Nico turned to face her for the first time. It is living with what he has become in the eyes of the world. Is it over? The question came out smaller than she intended. The debt is paid, Nico said. The threat is gone. You are free, Cassandra. Completely free. But then he paused, and in that pause lived everything unsaid. That night in the diner, he continued, each word measured, when I could not make my hand stop shaking, when you walked in covered in blood and gave me a purpose again, that meant something. You saw me at my lowest, and you did not run. I saw you at yours, and I understood. Understood what? She asked. That survival sometimes requires trusting the person you were taught to fear most, Nico said. You saved my niece's life. I saved yours. We are bound by that now. By the shared darkness. Cassandra reached into her bag. Her hands were steady as she pulled out the drawing, the one Micah had made weeks ago, the one that had been in her pocket the night in the parking lot, soaked with rain and her own tears, the colors bleeding together until the figures were almost unrecognizable. But they were still there, a mother, a child, holding hands beneath a rainbow. He drew this last week, she said softly. It was with me that night. When I was in the parking lot thinking about giving up, when my body was failing me, I felt this in my pocket and remembered I had a reason to stay alive. She handed it to him. The paper was fragile now, worn at the edges from being folded and unfolded so many times. A relic of survival. I think he should draw a new one, Cassandra continued. With more people in it. Because family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Nico took the drawing. His jaw tightened. When he looked at her, his eyes were bright, and for the first time, she realized that what she was seeing was not the Mafia boss, not the man who controlled an empire with a glance. She was seeing a human being learning how to feel again. I would like that, he said, his voice rough like gravel. Very much. 2 weeks later, she brought Micah to meet Nico properly. The coffee shop was neutral ground, a place where Nico came during daylight hours, where the neon signs were off and the violence felt impossible. Micah clung to Cassandra's leg when they arrived, suddenly shy in the presence of this tall man with the scar and the gold watch. Nico knelt to Micah's level without being asked. This small gesture, the powerful man lowering himself to meet a child at eye level, shifted something inside Cassandra's chest. Your mom is very brave, Nico said. Did you know that? Micah nodded slowly. She saved my niece. She's a hero. That makes her one of the bravest people I know. Micah considered this with the serious expression of someone weighing enormous information. Then he asked, with the blunt honesty only children possess, are you a good guy or a bad guy? Marco and Pietro, standing nearby, froze. Cassandra held her breath. Nico did not look away from the boy. I am trying very hard to be a good guy, he said. Your mom is helping me remember how. Micah thought about this. Then he extended his small hand for a handshake, very formal, very certain. Nico shook it solemnly, and something in his expression, something that had been broken, fractured, unrepairable, seemed to settle into place. In the background, Marco and Pietro exchanged the kind of look that said they were witnessing something impossible, something that violated every law of the world they inhabited. 3 months later, Cassandra worked day shifts at the diner. Micah no longer stayed with neighbors who grew colder each week. He ran to meet her after school now, his backpack bouncing against his small shoulders, his voice bright with stories about recess and drawings and the boy named Tommy who wanted to be an astronaut. Nico came every Thursday at 3 o'clock. Booth 7, always. He drank his coffee black and read the newspaper while Cassandra worked, and no one dared ask questions about the man with the scar or why Marco stood outside watching the street. But they left drawings taped to her locker. Small masterpieces in colored pencil, his niece and Micah holding hands, stick figures under rainbows, hearts drawn in crayon, messages written in careful child's handwriting. You are my friend, one said. I like you, said another. Thank you for saving me. The diner filled with the smell of coffee and cooking oil and possibility. The neon lights flickered steadily. Rain began to fall outside, gentle this time, not violent, not threatening. The kind of rain that washes the city clean and leaves everything gleaming. And in booth 7, when Cassandra brought him his third cup of coffee, Nico looked at her with eyes that had learned how to carry something other than rage. His hand rested near hers on the table, not quite touching, but close. Always close now. Thank you, he said, and the words meant everything, for saving his niece, for seeing him when he was falling apart, for teaching him that survival was not about standing alone, but about being brave enough to accept help when it arrives. Cassandra squeezed his hand. Thank you for staying, she whispered. When everything wanted to push you away, thank you for staying. If this story moved something inside you, if it touched the part of you that believes in second chances and unexpected salvation, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that the people who save us are not always the ones we expect, and family is not measured in blood but in moments of choosing to stay. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Because tomorrow we have another story coming that will show you what loyalty truly costs, and the price some people pay to protect those they love. Comment below, have you ever been saved by someone unexpected? Tell me your story. I read every single one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Until tomorrow, remember, the storms that break us open are often the ones that let the light in. We wish you good health, joy, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye.